Gather North Jersey is a partnership between the NJTPA and the Voorhees Transportation Center at Rutgers University. The Institute sponsors a series of training activities designed to enhance the capacity of counties, municipalities, and nonprofits and others within the region. We're excited that you've joined us today for this conversation. Micromobility, such as e-bikes and e-scooters, provide transportation options with multiple benefits. While e-bikes help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, they also reduce traffic congestion and the need for traditional parking spaces. They are more affordable than traditional vehicles. They help with gaps in the transportation system, such as addressing first and last mile connections, and e-bikes expand access to a range of community destinations. So today we'll talk about the different types of e-bikes, how they play a role in the market, and incentive programs to increase affordability and accessibility. Please feel free to use the Q&A feature to submit questions for the panelists. We will take questions at the end of the presentations. And now I'll turn it over to Jacob Thompson, who is the researcher at the Voorhees Transportation Center and part of the team that works on Together North Jersey. Jacob.
Thank you, Blythe. And I am sharing my screen. Everyone can see this, right? I hate to ask, but I don't see the green rectangle anymore. Perfect. All right. So I'm here today to talk about, let's tell you what an e-bike is, what some of the pros and cons are, and give a quick look at the some regulations, classifications, and then touch on some things to keep in mind about safety and equity. So here's NJDOT's definition, which is pretty long, and I'll summarize it by saying that basically an e-bike is a bicycle with a small motor that can go up to 20 miles an hour if you aren't pedaling. So essentially it's a bicycle that makes pedaling easier, especially when starting or going uphill. It uses a battery-powered motor that either assists you in pedaling or by using a throttle. The battery charges by plugging it in directly to a regular wall socket, like you can see in that picture there. And the charge typically lasts up to 50 miles and takes about 4 to 5 hours for a complete charge. Maintenance costs on e-bikes are typically estimated to be about $400 a year if you ride it daily. So a little bit more than a traditional bicycle, especially due to higher wear and tear on the brakes and tires from just riding it farther and a little bit faster and harder probably. But the battery charge only costs about $30 a year to charge, so that's not really a significant cost on the maintenance cost. So there are 3 classes of e-bikes, and class 1 and 2 e-bikes are limited to 20 miles an hour. And the difference between them is that class 1 e-bikes have a pedal assist function, so you can only move the bike if you're pedaling. For anyone who's never ridden an e-bike, the best way I can describe what that feels like is that it just kind of lightens the resistance that you feel when pedaling. Especially when starting from a standstill, like at a light, or if you're going uphill. So it just makes it a lot easier and less effort. Class 2 e-bikes have a throttle, so you don't have to be pedaling to move the bike if you don't want to. But if you just use the throttle function, that will run your battery out a lot faster. In New Jersey, class 1 and class 2 e-bikes are treated basically the same as traditional bicycles. So if you're riding a class 1 or 2 e-bike, you follow the same rules of the road as you would on a regular bike. Helmets are required only if you're 17 or younger. You don't need a license or registration. You can take them on transit, following whatever transit restrictions there might be for certain peak hours. And you can park on the sidewalk as long as you're not impeding traffic on the sidewalk. Class 3 e-bikes are motorized bicycles or mopeds, and they do require licensing, and you do need to register them. All riders must wear a helmet, and you have to be 15 years or older to ride one. But you can still use bike lanes and bike routes. And also class 3 bikes go up to 28 miles an hour to still be classified as a class 3 e-bike. The main difference here in New Jersey is that the New Jersey Motor Vehicle Commission treats them differently than traditional bicycles, and it classifies them as a specialty vehicle, which is the same category that ATVs, dirt bikes, and snowmobiles are in, and vehicles like that. So I do want to point out some pros and cons because it takes a lot less effort to ride an e-bike. You can ride longer, farther distances. You can ride a little bit faster because it does take less effort to maintain a higher speed. So while 12 to 15 miles an hour on a traditional bike might take the wind out of a lot of people, sustaining that kind of speed on an e-bike, you really don't feel it as much. So, you know, if you're riding to work or a social event, you're not gonna show up looking sweaty like you just were in a race to get to wherever you're going. And I did want to show this map of Cherry Hill here to just show the difference in like distances you can ride. So this was from a studio assignment from last spring where we looked at what a 15-minute travel time would look like when you're walking, riding a traditional bike or an e-bike. So that orange-ish bright color is walking distance. The tan is a regular bike, and then the blue is an e-bike. And what we found is that in Cherry Hill, 19% of the population can reach a grocery store by walking 15 minutes or less. 77% of people can reach a grocery store by biking on a traditional bike in 15 minutes or less. But when you're on an e-bike, 98% of the population is within a 15-mile ride of a grocery store. So it really puts a lot of things into reach, which is great. And I did want to plug the New Jersey Bike and Ped Resource Center. And there's a lot of good stuff there to check out and helpful resources for all information regarding micromobility in New Jersey. Especially like this handy cheat sheet here that summarizes e-bike and e-scooter laws in New Jersey. So if you're interested, definitely go check that out. I did want to point out some things to keep in mind when considering e-bikes in your community regarding specifically equity and safety. So since you can ride longer distances on e-bikes, you will likely end up on a larger road at some point, and there might be more traffic. So it's important that everybody on the road is mindful of their actions while driving or riding your e-bike, especially if there aren't dedicated bike lanes. As far as the bikes themselves, follow the manufacturer's guides for charging and storing batteries properly to avoid any mishaps. Kind of like that scare about them catching fire all the time last year, which was just due to some faulty batteries and probably like overcharging them or not storing them properly and things like that. And really, you just want to practice riding and getting a feel for it before you get on any roads. And just always keep in mind existing local legislation regarding bicycle laws. And just like I was saying, like traditional bikes, you can't ride on highways in New Jersey. There's this list here in the bike manual, and e-bikes have to follow those same highway restrictions. As far as equity concerns to keep in mind, whether it's a regular bike or an e-bike, Black and brown people have different experiences from white people when it comes to enforcing the rules. So you can find a lot of good information at the group of Biking While Black, and there's just a lot of good research and articles that point to that, and just a lot of good things to keep in mind when considering locating e-bikes or any incentives regarding e-bikes in your community. It's also good to remember that dangerous roads and higher traffic roads are often located in low-income and minority communities. and bicycle infrastructure might also not be distributed equally among various communities. So always be mindful of any targeted efforts to address any of these disparities. Finally, the upfront cost can be a barrier to many people who might want to get an e-bike. So there are a number of incentives nationwide that we can learn from, which leads me to our guest speakers today. So first we have John MacArthur and Luke Jones, who are going to be talking about their work and research on e-bike incentives and presenting some of their findings. And then we have Ash Lovell from People for Bikes, who is going to talk to us about their work and their e-bike incentive toolkit. John MacArthur is the Sustainable Transportation Program Manager at the Transportation Research and Education Center at Portland State University. And Luke Jones is a professor of economics at Valdosta State University. And the two of them have collaborated on research on e-bikes and e-bike incentives in the US, and they will be sharing some of that with us today. Ash Lovell is the electric bicycle policy and campaign director at People for Bikes, and she has a background in environmentalism and sustainability. And like I said, we'll be talking to us more about the e-bike incentive toolkit. So with that, I will pass it over to John and Luke. Thank you.
Great. Let's share my slides, assume everything is visible there. And thank you, Jacob, for the introduction and the overview of e-bikes. I have probably way more slides than I should for 10 minutes, so I'm going to try to go through them quickly. The slides will be available for people if they want to look at them. I could talk 2 hours about e-bikes, so let's jump into it. So is 2023, we're at the end here, the year of the e-bike. I think we will look back at this as being the year that we kind of break over this chasm. But I look at this as not just the chasm of are people going to adopt e-bikes, but really is it jumping the chasm for cycling, for utilitarian purposes, for the movement of people for transportation in the US. So I think it's an exciting year. In general, more and more research, some stuff that we've done, others, other researchers that we've worked with or are working on this topic are building evidence that is showing that e-bikes get more people biking more often, and replacing VMT as a substitution for their e-bike trips, which is important because, as we talked about incentives, a lot of the incentives are for specific purposes of dollars related to reducing CO2 emissions. So having that kind of background that shows that our people are using them for non-recreational trips is important to build confidence in why we should be spending money related to this as incentives. So how do we get more people riding more often? I kind of look at these, we need to increase awareness. We can do that through lending libraries and outreach and e-bike, bike share in general, but now e-bike share. Portland itself has a full e-bike fleet of bike share bikes. I think all bike share should be electric. It is more an adaptive and inclusive device. So if you have a bike share program, if you create it, make it so it's all e-bikes, you're going to get more people to use them. They're going to use them more often and go further distances. But to sell more e-bikes, and we're going to talk about incentives. So, but there are these other things that we, to get more people to purchase them. But most importantly, and we're not going to really jump into this part of it, is that if you don't have safe places to bike, you're not going to get the penetration, even if or it's not going to be successful in meeting these goals unless you have that, bike infrastructure. So no matter what, you can give people e-bikes, but if they don't have places that they feel that are safe to ride, they're just not going to ride as much. We've been tracking e-bike incentive programs for a couple of years now. We have a e-bike incentive tracker that some of you may have seen. Over the years, there has been a lot of different types of incentive programs. They first kind of started out of utility programs and some local cities trying to do small incentive programs. Now we are at a point where we have 10 states that have full-on incentive programs. Some are active where they are actually rolled out and they're giving incentives out. Some have been approved and are kind of trying to build that program. The big one we're looking at is California is soft launching, this month or quarter Q1 of next year. That's going to be really exciting to kind of see how that program rolls out. $10 million, but it's big, or a little under $10 million, but it's the whole state of California, which is going to be interesting. So anyway, so a lot of activity happening. A lot of it is based on, when we talk about these state programs and city programs that have been rolling out, are kind of using the model of Denver. Denver kind of got out there quickly, was able to throw out incentives, which are great, and have they have over 7,000 incentive vouchers that have been redeemed now, and a very successful program, and has become a model for many of these programs because of the success they have, but also the experience. So, but a couple of things I just want to point out is that they have been adaptive as they've gone through this, both in that they lowered some of the incentive values to be more efficient in the funds that they're putting out. But they also have added new classes like adaptive bikes. But I think one of the things I like to point out with a lot of these programs, they have tiered programs for particularly to focus some, high level incentives to low income communities or underserved communities. And then they have a general kind of way lower kind of general public incentive programs. A couple of things, they do a brick and mortar, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, for their bike shops, that it's required so that you purchase them through the bike shops there. And also, like, they are looking at the program estimates, and this was last year, that they are getting over 100,000 miles of VMT replaced every week, which is basically 1.4 metric tons a year of replacement of car trips. And we're still trying to build evidence here, and we're seeing what Denver's doing in these other states. But again, we're seeing that kind of idea that people are purchasing them and using them to replace car trips. I just wanted to bring up, because one of the things that is unique with many of these programs is they give a sweetener or extra for cargo bikes. But this also, which is great, because I think a lot of people think of cargo bikes, they can carry more people. They have more of a kind of substitution effect when you think about with cars, either groceries or other people. But in some states like Oregon, they dropped any kind of incentive related to cargo bikes because there wasn't a way of determining what is a cargo bike. We don't have an official definition, and a bike, like, how does it pass? Is it a cargo bike or not? So when we're kind of thinking about this as you're building programs, if you want to incentivize it, there are some practical implications of including cargo bikes and adaptive bikes. How do you determine that, especially if you're using large incentive values, to make sure that people are using those incentives appropriately? Again, there's some evidence around incentive programs. I'm not going to go into this one, but this study is from some of the early rebate programs in Northern California. You can go, find the report, but they basically, it's showing that, again, evidence of replacing car trips, but also that, people are using them for 50% of their trips for recreational purposes. So they're using them for both recreation and utility type of functions. And then the other thing is that because these programs were set up in a certain way, they were successful in targeting low-income communities, but they were not as successful in getting participation of people of color. So, there are some kind of like when you put out these programs and the goals and outcomes that you want to achieve, in trying to figure out how do you also make sure that you're getting those outcomes where you need them to be. So we wrote a white paper. This is a framework that we put in the white paper around building a program design. It goes from, what are those outcomes? What are the principles, to how do you identify your target population? Who are those? What level of income population that you're trying to hit? Are you looking at specific underserved communities or not? To types of bikes, Jacob talked about these, the 3 classes. Are you going to include, class 1, 2, and 3 in there? Cargo bikes, mountain bikes, these are all like important decisions. I suggest that these are not put in to the rules and regulations like we have seen. Washington itself, in the regulation that's funding the larger program, says that mountain bikes can't be funded. I don't think that's appropriate in the language of the bill. It's appropriate in the program design, whoever's managing that at the state or city level. And then you can, go through all these other things about like, what is the incentive amounts? Luke's going to talk about that in a second here. To how do you deal with outreach and strategic partners? Outreach is so important for these to be really effective. And one of the things that a lot of people are looking at is how do lending libraries work with these incentive programs to help them be more effective and to target communities that you are trying to provide mobility access related to these incentives. One of the big issues in these voucher programs that Denver solved very early on is that individuals that are low income were less likely to be able to get on their computer at the time to, they have a kind of a first come first serve voucher system, and they weren't able to be there for the 5 minutes to get their vouchers before they all ran out because there's such high demand. So they were kind of looking at new ways in which they could target those populations and also give them a fair chance to get vouchers. So more information is needed, such as evaluating these programs as achieving these outcomes in a full list of outcomes, because reduction of CO2 is one of these, but it's only, there's other potential benefits such as improved safety, congestion mitigation, local economic development. When you talk about bike shops and providing those supports in low income and underserved communities, it brings money into those shops. Obviously, the physical and mental health benefits may outweigh the CO2 benefits, but how do you quantify those? We need more information to explore streamlining the administrative process to reduce the overhead. And then finally, and Luke's going to go into this, determine the most cost-effective incentive levels so that we are kind of not over-incentivizing certain groups and kind of optimally getting the right incentives for people. So I'd like to end it. If 2023 is not the year of the e-bike, next year definitely will be. So for more information, here's my stuff for the white paper and our incentive tracker. And you can always send me questions. Happy to answer them at any time. It's kind of a whirlwind. Sorry. Luke, you're up next.
That was great, John. Thank you. Luke, if you could just come off mute, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thanks, John. So today I'm going to be talking about some recent research on e-bike incentives that John and I have been working on with Cameron Bennett at Portland State University and Chris Cherry at the University of Tennessee. And I'm going to share some of what we learned about designing effective e-bike incentives. So in this study, we specifically looked at e-bike purchase incentives, and these are incentives that help offset the purchase price of a new e-bike with the goal of spurring additional purchases and increasing e-bike ownership. So these types of programs have become increasingly popular in recent years, like the Denver program that John was talking about would be an example of this type of incentive program. And we're interested in learning more about how we can design these programs to get the most additional purchases per incentive dollars spent. So how to make the best use of these incentive dollars. To this end, there are three key design concerns that we wanted to address: the incentive delivery mechanism, the incentive amounts, and then how best to allocate these incentives across, say, different income levels and e-bike types. So to study these design issues, we conducted a nationwide stated preference survey of over 2,000 potential e-bike consumers across 20 U.S. cities, cities that encompassed a wide range of geographical and spatial variation. And we used the consumer data that we obtained from the survey to estimate a statistical choice model that allows us to model the effect of the purchase incentives on e-bike adoption. One of the tricky things about estimating the effects of incentives is that you can't just look at how many incentives were distributed in a program. You can't just say, okay, we distributed this many vouchers, so that's how many additional sales we induced through the incentives, because a lot of consumers would buy an e-bike even without an incentive. So our approach lets us estimate the induced purchases or the additional purchases above and beyond the baseline, so that we can get a more accurate estimate of the real effect of these incentives. And we looked at three different types of incentive delivery mechanisms: a point of purchase discount, where the consumer essentially gets a subsidized e-bike price right up front; a mail-in rebate, where the consumer would pay the full purchase price up front and they would be reimbursed later after they submit some paperwork; and an income tax credit, where again, the consumer would pay the full purchase price when they purchased their e-bike, and then they would get sort of a reimbursement through the form of this income tax credit. We considered incentive amounts ranging from $0 to $1,200, and we considered 5 different income levels based on a household's percentage of the federal poverty level. And we looked at 2 different types of e-bike types in sort of broad buckets. We looked at standard e-bikes and cargo e-bikes. And here's some of the lessons we've learned so far from this research. So key takeaway number 1 is that our point of purchase discounts are more effective than the mail-in rebates and tax credits. Offering point of purchase discounts is an emerging best practice. So a lot of the popular programs use this, and our findings strongly support that practice. In this figure here, we see the program expenditure, the amount of spending on incentives on the vertical axis. And on the horizontal axis, we see the additional e-bikes induced above and beyond the baseline. And what this figure shows us is that for any given level of program expenditure, the point of purchase discount yields a larger number of additional e-bikes on average. People like the incentive upfront as opposed to having to front the full cost and receive a reimbursement later. Key takeaway number 2 is that a flat incentive across income levels and e-bike types is highly cost effective. So in this figure here, we see on the vertical axis the cost per additional e-bike, which is basically a measure of the cost effectiveness of the program. The more additional e-bikes we're inducing per dollar spent, the lower the cost per additional e-bike in terms of incentives. And on the horizontal axis, we see a range of different program budgets. What we did was we basically said, okay, if we had the perfectly optimal allocation of incentives across different income levels and e-bike types set at just the right amounts, what's the lowest possible cost per additional e-bike we could achieve? And that's what you see with the solid black line. So that's sort of like the best case scenario. The dashed gray line is just a fixed incentive amount across all e-bike types and income levels. And what this figure is showing us is that that simple flat incentive comes pretty close to being theoretically perfectly cost effective. You don't lose much by just going with this simple flat incentive across income levels and e-bike types. And that type of incentive has the added benefit of being, from an administrative perspective, easy to implement and relatively low cost. So that, if you're starting a program, that might not be a bad place to start. Key takeaway 3A, right sizing the incentive amounts to the available budget increases the program effectiveness. And I think this is one of the things that a lot of programs, at least when they start out, I think they get wrong. I think they set the incentives too high. And I think we've seen that with the Denver program, the way that they've had to adjust their incentives downward. Basically, if you had set the incentives so high that you run out of your available budget really quickly, that hurts the program effectiveness. And that's illustrated in this figure here. On the vertical axis, we see the number of additional e-bikes that could be achieved if you had $6 million to spend on incentives. On the horizontal axis, we see the projected program costs, which will vary with the amount of incentives that you set. The dashed line is the theoretical maximum number of additional e-bikes you could achieve with $6 million budget if the incentives were dialed in perfectly. And what we see here is that as you set your incentives too high so that the projected program costs go above 6 million, you don't get as many additional e-bikes as you could as if the incentives were dialed into that $6 million budget. So basically what you really want to do is try to set your incentive so that in expectation, you're going to perfectly exhaust the budget. You don't want to run out of the incentives and have lots of people who still want to buy an incentivized e-bike. And as I mentioned, I think a lot of programs are currently setting their incentives inefficiently high. This figure here shows the cost-effective point-of-purchase discounts under different scenarios across a range of program budgets. The dashed gray line shows what would be the cost-effective incentive amounts if you had that flat incentive across e-bike types and income levels. And we can see that for, say, a hypothetical market size of 2 million e-bike consumers and a $10 million policy budget, that incentive, the optimal incentive, doesn't go over $400 per e-bike. Now, if you put in some eligibility restrictions so that you're targeting those incentives at sort of lower income groups, then these optimal incentive amounts increase, but they still, even say, if you only let the incentives apply to people below or equal to 200% of the federal poverty level, and you have a $10 million budget, that incentive still reaches only about $1,400. And key takeaway number 4 is that higher incentives for lower income levels reduces adoption, but it improves equity. If you look at the right-hand panel first, I'll draw your attention to sort of the far right. This is the US population distribution across our 5 income levels. And you can see that by far, most people are in the greater than 400% of the federal poverty level. If you look at the fixed discount, all eligible, so that's our flat incentive across income levels and e-bike types, we can see that this creates sort of a budget distribution across income groups that is somewhat similar to the US population distribution, although the lowest 2 income groups, 0 to 100% FPL and 100 to 200% FPL, they receive a little bit smaller percentage of that budget than their population share. If you put in, say, an equity-focused program where all people 300% of the federal poverty level below are the only ones who are eligible for the incentive, that drastically increases the amount of budget, obviously, that's going to those lower income groups. But you can see that it also reduces the cost effectiveness. So that the cost effectiveness of that type of program will be illustrated by the dashed blue line. And you can see that it's creeping higher than our sort of theoretical minimum cost. And if you make the, say, program even more restrictive so that only 200 and below FPL are eligible, well, then that obviously is going to allocate 100% of the budget to those lower income groups. So it's greatly equity enhancing. But as you can see by this orange dotted line, it really increases the cost per additional e-bike. So you lose efficiency. So I guess the main takeaway here is that equity enhancement and increasing adoption, we don't find evidence that they're complementary goals. There does appear to be a trade-off between the two. So that's something certainly to keep in mind when you're designing a program. And probably if you had some type of tiered program where you had high incentives for lower income groups and dial that incentive back for higher income groups, in theory, you could use a program like that to sort of say, okay, we want to allocate X percentage of the budget to our lowest 2 income groups, and then conditional on that, get the most adoption possible. You could dial in a program like that with a tiered incentive design. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Luke. Next we have Ash Lovell, who'll be talking a little bit about People for Bikes and their incentive toolkit.
Thanks, Jacob. Thanks, John and Luke. That was so great. It's so great to see the data behind all of this wonderful work that's happening. Give me 1 second while I get my screen ready. Okay. So as we said before, my name is, it's Dr. Ashley Lovell. You can call me Ash. I'm the Electric Bicycle Policy and Campaign Director for People for Bikes. I'm going to give a little overview of who People for Bikes is, and then we'll dive into our new e-bike incentive toolkit. So People for Bikes is the bicycle industry's trade association. We represent over 300 different manufacturers of bicycles and electric bicycles across the US. And our mission is to make the US the best place to ride a bike in the world. We know we are not anywhere near that right now, but it's good to have lofty goals. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, and we've got great partners and folks that we work with across the country to do this. So as I said, many different industry brands represented through People for Bikes. This is a little overwhelming. I apologize. You may recognize some of the brands on there. You may not. There are quite a few new brands that have come onto the scene over the last 5 years that are making just electric bicycles. There's a lot of those that are represented here. And we also represent, you know, the endemic bicycle industry in the US, like the Treks and the Specialized and the Giants that are also making electric bicycles. So how is People for Bikes going to help make the US the best place to ride a bike in the world? We have 3 different pillars. The first is infrastructure, the second is policy, and the third is participation. As John mentioned earlier, we're not going to get people riding if there aren't safe and connected and protected places for people to ride. And so that is why we focus on infrastructure. We focus on supporting infrastructure policy, and we do that at the local, state, and federal level. And we also focus on infrastructure funding. How do we get bike projects and bike lanes and micromobility infrastructure on the ground in your backyard? The second is policy. This is a huge piece of what I do as the e-bike director. There's a lot of work to be done on different policies. I saw some mentions in the chat of policies that New Jersey is exploring around regulating electric bicycles. I can talk more about that in our discussion section. It's definitely something I will be working on and People for Bikes will be working on. There's a lot of work going on in the battery safety space, both in New York, but also across the country and at the federal level. So lots of work on policy and electric bicycles, which makes sense because this is a rapidly evolving technology, and usually policy takes a little while to catch up with technology, and we want to make sure that we are promoting safe and well-made and certified products as we create these incentives. And then finally, participation. Who's riding? What are they riding? Where are they riding it? What are their challenges? We do a lot of work with John, actually, just worked on a e-bike rider survey for us this year. So we really want to know that data of, you know, what does a cyclist in the US look like? And what does a future cyclist look like? So electric bicycles are the fastest growing category in the entire bicycle industry. We see a lot of potential for growth here. And as the previous speakers have mentioned, it's not a dramatic change from a traditional bicycle, but there are some key components that are different. The goal is to make you feel just slightly more superhuman than you are, and to make riding more fun so that you want to do it more often. In 2022, the industry sold 1 million e-bikes. This number is actually a little low. There's a lot of direct-to-consumer bikes that are being sold that are very difficult to track. So I would estimate we sold significantly more than this in 2022, but this is a trend that's going to keep growing. The projections say that by 2030, there would be probably 17 million e-bikes sold per year. So they're here, they're coming, and they're going to stick around. 38 million Americans rode an e-bike last year. This is a really great number. This speaks to both folks that bought an electric bicycle and rode it for transportation, to get out of cars, to recreate, all of that, but also folks using e-bike share. So like John mentioned, really commuting using these kind of public shared systems is a huge piece of folks using e-bikes across the country. A little bit more about sales and projections and what we're seeing. So the yellow line is electric bicycles, and you can see the forecast is that this section of the industry is going to grow a lot. What you can also see is that there were a lot of bicycles sold in 2020, and we know that that's because of the pandemic and the incentives that were given at the federal level for folks to, continue spending. So that has actually brought sales down for the last couple of years, and we project that those sales are going to stay a little lower. So what you as the public should take from this is that now is a fabulous time to buy a high quality electric bicycle, because everything's on sale, because we need to sell more bicycles. So carry that with you if you carry nothing else. Okay, so my big goal of being here today is to talk about our electric bicycle incentive toolkit. I can send out a link to this great document after the webinar. The goal of this toolkit was to pull together a lot of data from across the country and talk about what are some of the best practices, what are some of the communities that are doing this really well. I think John and Luke covered a lot of this information before, so I'm not going to go into it at a deep level. But this is designed for policymakers, for municipalities, for folks that are really interested in tackling greenhouse gas emissions, and that want to see, what is that legislative and policy guidance that we need in order to launch this type of program. So again, these programs have been covered by John and Luke, and you can see the tracker that People for Bikes helps John and his team update. And there are some great programs across the country. We saw over $112 million go toward e-bike incentives at the state level last year. So these are growing. A really big area of growth is at the local level, and with the energy companies themselves creating these incentives for folks to use. So if you're interested in how these are funded, I'm happy to go into that in the discussion as well. But lots of great programs, lots of great examples across the country now, and lots of great learnings. So I'll go into kind of best practices. Speaking to the different types of folks that are interested in e-bike incentives and the different levels of income that these folks have, making the program voucher-based at point of sale is a great way to make sure that people don't have to carry the cost of these incentives on their own income until they get reimbursed with their taxes. That's really difficult for folks that are at lower income levels. Include in-store and online retailers. There's a lot of great products that are being sold direct to consumer. There's a lot of not great products that are being sold direct to consumer as well. And there are ways that you can craft your incentive program to kind of weed out those lower quality products. And I can talk about that later as well. Prioritize dedicated outreach and incentives to low income residents. This is something that previous speakers have spoken about. Include all forms of electric bicycles within the 3-class system. There are a lot of great models out there. One tricky area is products that can be switched between class 2, which has a throttle and goes up to 20 miles an hour, and class 3, which goes up to 28 miles an hour, but should only be pedal assist. Those products are tricky, and I have thoughts on whether or not to include them, and you can reach out to me separately if you'd like to discuss that. And then, of course, partner with local nonprofits and bike dealers. One of the biggest things that we see in the success of these programs is whether the bikes can be serviced and maintained after they're bought. You want to keep people riding. And the way to keep people riding is to make sure that they have a great relationship with a local bike dealer that can help them fix any of those issues that come up, whether it's, chains coming off or tires needing to be refilled or any other component of the bike. If this is really going to be a car replacement option, folks need to be able to have a good relationship with their dealers to fix these bikes. Okay, so one more time, low income provisions are key. What we're seeing is that users really are replacing short car trips with these electric bicycles. We know that the majority of trips that are taken by cars are 3 miles or less. This is a great way to reduce car trips, increase your time outside, increase your health outcomes, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There's great trackers that are talking about the greenhouse gas emission reduction outcomes from these incentives. Rocky Mountain Institute has a great one that's part of our e-bike incentive toolkit, where you can see the outcomes of the Denver-based incentive and how many greenhouse gas emission reductions we've seen from that so far. One last thing that I want to discuss is the intersection of safety and these incentives. So there's a lot of folks that when they buy an electric bicycle either haven't been on a bike for a long time or maybe have never been on a bike. And there's a lot of things to know about your bicycle and your electric bicycle. So People for Bikes partnered with the League earlier this year. We launched in August, and we have eBike Smart, which talks you through both everything you need to know when you're buying a bike, when you're opening your bike for the first time, when you're getting on for the first ride, and what are best practices in terms of etiquette, road position, signaling, and collision avoidance. So there are 5 modules that are part of this eBike Smart website. It's free. It's just ebikesmart.org. You can access all of this online, and it's a great way to just get folks ready to use their bikes. I did see in the chat as well, there are some questions about battery safety. We have a whole module in eBike Smart on how do you as a rider safely charge your battery, and also what is a safe and certified battery, so that you know what kind of product that you're buying. And that's it. That's it for me.
All right. Well, that was great, everyone. A lot of great information there. And even I learned a lot from all of that. So thank you very much. We've been getting some questions in the Q&A as we've been going along. We've tried to answer some of them. There is some more information. You can reach out to us for some of the things, anything we might not get to or that hasn't been covered. So I guess to get us started, one of the main bigger questions we have. So here in New Jersey, what do you think a municipality's next steps would be if they wanted to pursue expanding e-bike use in their towns?
Ashley, why don't you start?
Sure, and then I'll hand it over to you. So again, I think exploring how you want to set your incentive up is a great way to start this process. There's lots of different ways to fund these types of programs. A lot of them are based on objectives related to climate plans. So how does the city reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Denver had a climate ballot initiative that helped fund their program. That was a really great and innovative model. Some programs have expanded existing electric vehicle funding to include electric bicycles. There's utility companies that are doing their own e-bike incentives, but there may be ways to also partner with utility companies to get funding for these programs. California is using their own greenhouse gas emission reduction fund for this. So I think figuring out where the money is coming from and how much money you will have is a great place to start. And then looking at these incentive toolkits and the data that was shared on, what are the best practices here? That would be my first step. John?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit everything. I think local partnerships. I mean, so we even talk about at the federal level. There has been e-bike incentive programs at the federal level submitted. obviously with things in DC the way they are, they're probably not going to get funded. So it's really up to states and local municipalities. And we're seeing a lot of action both at the state level, but also, at the municipality level. And you can have both. And, the city of Denver and the state of Colorado have both, and in California. So it's about partnerships. It's about finding some money to run a pilot. I think what's great about the city level, municipality level ones, you can be very focused in the areas and where you want to kind of incentivize e-bike purchases. You can work with local dealers. You can do the outreach in the communities that need it. It's harder when you kind of have these statewide programs. It gets kind of peanut butter of the whole state, and it's like, but at the municipality level, you can really work with the communities. And like I said, with the linear libraries, there are great opportunities to both do outreach, but also build rider education around safe riding. I saw some, questions about, safe riding, safe battery charging, and it could be very successful. Even if like Corvallis had $50,000, and it's not a lot of bikes that they're incentivizing, but it's a start to build up a dialogue and a discussion around cycling in general.
Great, thank you. I guess since you just talked about expanding or public utilities expanding like electric vehicle infrastructure, there's a few questions that have been asked by in the Q&A. So specifically, like the lack of public charging locations for e-bikes and scooters, and also charging e-bike batteries being slow. Ash, since you just mentioned the role that utilities could play in that, I feel like those might be a little connected. If you have any thoughts on those?
Totally. I mean, similar with what we're seeing with electric vehicles, charging is definitely a part of a conversation, but differently from electric vehicles, the general mileage of electric bicycles is like 50 miles to a charge. So you probably won't need to charge your electric bicycle if you're riding it from your house to the grocery store and home again, or your house to pick up the kids from school on the e-cargo bike and then home again. I will say we have an e-cargo bike and we charge it maybe once a week, probably once every couple of weeks, and we use it every day. So the charging concerns, if you're using this as an individual to reduce your transportation use with cars, shouldn't really be a concern. The concerns that they're seeing in New York are because folks are using these, some of them are electric bicycles, but most of them don't actually qualify as an electric bicycle. Most of them are scooters. They're using them for 8 hours a day and going straight for 8 hours a day. So as an individual, those charging concerns shouldn't be too much for you.
Yeah, and I just add real quickly is that, for personally owned bikes, most of them have removable batteries. So you can always bring it into a place that can charge. And luckily for, unlike EVs, there are millions of charging stations in every city. Like every outlet, you can charge an e-bike battery. So in that, I think it's interesting when you talk about bike share and how you think about, publicly or shared mobility. That's a different kind of discussion. I think most providers right now are looking at removable batteries. They're not looking for charging a bike share or scooter share in the public right away. So, but that said, if you are a city and looking, like some cities have building codes to encourage more bike storage, bike, area, things in new buildings and at workplaces, those all help. And thinking about cargo bikes, ensuring that some spaces are not like racks that you have to, that you have enough room to put in a cargo bike. and maybe allow charging there, or just allowing a cargo bike to be able to be locked in a bike room is important. So
Thank you. So again, you were just talking about how some of the vehicles that are being used in New York don't actually meet the qualification of being e-bikes at all. And there's again several questions in the chat here about class 3 e-bikes and what can be done. So I guess it's just kind of two questions about that would be a lot of parents are buying bikes for their kids, but they don't know the difference between class 1, class 2, class 3. And one of the problems in Asbury Park, I think was mentioned, is that they're buying this specific model of bike that can go like up to 40 or 60 miles an hour, and they're for kids that are also under 15. So I guess kind of two-part question on that is, how do you educate the buyers for that who don't know the difference? And also, what would your advice be for municipalities on how to deal with that, with this problem that's going on? Because they have tried some restrictions, just blanket restrictions, I guess, on those, but what are y'all's thoughts on that?
Sorry, I'll go first again. So we created the e-bike smart curriculum for a variety of different types of riders, but the most that we've seen across the country are these concerns around youth riding things that aren't actually electric bicycles. This is a huge issue in Southern California, and there's actually a lot of great models of different communities. Encinitas is one, Irvine is another, San Clemente is another, that have partnered with schools and parents and law enforcement and bike retailers and others to do this kind of educational program for youth riders on A, what is and is not an electric bicycle, and B, how do you ride responsibly when you have something. So I think one big challenge, going to the first part of the question, one big challenge is that the 3-class legislation that we talked about before, what are the 3 different modes? That was a policy campaign, and it's been a very effective policy campaign. Electric bicycles are considered bicycles in 48 states across the country, but it wasn't a public communications campaign. And this is why parents have so much trouble figuring out what is and is not an electric bicycle. I know the brand that you're talking about. I won't be saying what the name of the brand is, but if your bike can be modified to go from 20 miles an hour with the throttle up to 40 miles an hour with the throttle, that's not an electric bicycle anymore, and it shouldn't be regulated that way. It's a problem. There's a lot of gray area in the regulatory space. It's a big thing that People for Bikes is working on this year and in future years. And those gray areas will be going away. So it is definitely the parents' responsibility to know that they're buying their kid a bicycle that counts as a bicycle. And there are some great resources on People for Bikes' site, peopleforbikes.org, that shows you what is and is not an electric bicycle. But another great way to just make sure that you're buying your kid a bike that is a bike is to go talk to retailers. They have really high quality, great products in their stores. And it's great to start those relationships too. John or Luke, anything else?
No. I mean, I think more information, everything Ash said is right on. I think more data needs to be happened. I think a lot of this is perceptions of safety. I will say still the number one cause of death of any pedestrian or all vehicle users are cars killing people walking and biking and other people in cars. And so e-bikes are not are not a cause of killing people, and so again, I think it goes to the issue about safe places to ride, but also I think there are perceptions around the safety of these devices. It's certainly an issue if you had a younger kid using using them inappropriately. But I think more information and data needs to happen, right, before we go off and regulate something that is not maybe the issue that we think it is.
Great, thank you. Trying to just sift through some of the questions. Did you have anything more you wanted to say, Ash, just while I'm scrolling through real quick about the pending legislation in New Jersey about just further regulating and restricting e-bikes?
Yeah, I can say this, and then unfortunately I have to hop because I have another meeting I have to get to. People for Bikes will be engaging on that legislation. It is problematic to say the least, and we will definitely have the best interests of bicycles and bicycle riders in mind as we explore that. What we really don't want is for high quality bicycles that fall within the 3-class system to no longer be able to be ridden by folks without registration. The whole point of the 3-class system is that e-bike is a bicycle. Those products that don't meet that should definitely be registered. So we'll be advocating for that.
Thank you. I guess one last question. We are a little over time, so I do apologize. We've just been having some great conversations. If anyone has any thoughts, there's a question in here about, and I know you had talked about this, John, potential equity issues with not diversifying the types of e-bikes in the bike share system.
Can you say that question again? I guess.
Oh, yes. Could there be a potential equity issue with not diversifying vehicle types in a bike share system? Because I know you mentioned that, and I've seen.
So are we talking, maybe we're talking about adaptive bikes within a bike share system? Is that, or?
Possibly, or just maybe
membership?
Bike shares that only have traditional bikes and no e-bikes in there also.
I mean, again, I'll say this, and I feel strongly about it. All bike shares should be electric, and I do understand there's the additional cost to that, and so maybe that's probably a barrier to do it. But you will get more people biking, and they're more of an inclusive bicycle. Even if you're looking at people with people with disabilities that could participate in cycling, but not with a traditional bike. And so, and then, as you want to expand the work related to equity and bike share, I suggest looking at the website Better Bike Share, which has a whole lot of equity programs. There are low income membership programs, to encourage, people in certain, neighborhoods and communities to participate in cycling, to reduce the cost of, the membership and the cost of using the bikes. They're very successful, and particularly for penetrating those communities and get them more access to mobility using bike share. So.
Thanks. And yeah, I look forward to your current research, you and Luke, the research being published, because there's some good information there about how you could potentially look at tiering the incentive level to specifically target low-income individuals within sort of like a more fixed budget. So we are over time, so I do apologize. Thanks for everyone for sticking around. Thank you especially to all of our speakers. This was a great conversation, and I don't know, Blythe or Miriam, if you had any closing remarks.
Yeah, no, just to reiterate, thank you for your time to all of our speakers, and thank you to everyone who attended today and were engaged with great questions. We appreciate it. We will post a recording of the webinar on the Together North Jersey website when it's ready. And please stay tuned for future events. Thanks for joining us today.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
All right.